On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. My name is Don, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies manage complexity and increase performance. One of the things that I just quickly wanted to mention before we get into the interview today is that I have a maturity assessment for your organization up on my website. The idea of this assessment is really for companies that are trying to scale and looking for the things that they should be doing now to help their organization overall increase the performances they're going to have with scaling the organization. Also, in this episode of the Life Science Success Podcast, my guest is Robin Mansukhani. Robin is the CEO of Deciduous Therapeutics, a venture-backed startup developing novel immunotherapies to treat age-related diseases. Additionally, helped co-found BlueStamp Engineering, an intensive project-based engineering program for high school students in New York, San Francisco, and Palo Alto. Welcome, Robin.
Cool. Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I completely butchered your company name, so you're going to have to probably help me along the ways as well. So,
yeah, that's okay. It's deciduous, as in the named after the deciduous trees, so the natural shedding of leaves. We intend to do the natural shedding of bad or senescent cells by the natural process, meaning by using the immune system.
Very cool. Yeah, so can you just tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my background is in biochemistry. Before that, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, went to school at Case Western, studied biochemistry there, went straight from there and actually into the venture capital and private equity world. In the venture capital world, I got to look at seed stage companies, so meaning companies fresh out of academia that we were putting money into, forming, and I realized that was a lot of fun. So the idea of understanding how things could be taken out of academia or government labs and all that work that happened in the research setting could then evolve into a company or a business that could then go and change an industry or revolutionize an industry was something that's very interesting to me. So the investing side of it was quite compelling, but as I did more of the early stage investing, what I really realized is that I actually liked being part of the teams and actually part of the founding groups and companies that were spinning out. I thought the challenge was immense, but the interest was all quite significant, and it was more exciting than anything I'd ever done before in my life. I made the switch from private equity and venture capital to go straight into running my own companies. Back in 2011, I co-founded a neuroimaging company where we were able to develop a platform around imaging different CNS markers in the brain. That company is headed into clinical trials. And then since then, I've advised a few more companies. In 2019, we founded Deciduous to, like it says in the beginning, we want to harness the immune system to treat age-related comorbidities by getting rid of senescent cells. So that's the quick background.
So whenever you were in venture capital, did it help you at all in terms of looking for companies like Deciduous? Whenever you were examining companies, did that help you in terms of finding this technology?
I don't know if that helped me. I'd say it brought a dose of reality, right? Because I think when you're on the investment side, you understand, if you read the abstract, it sounds pretty compelling. But once you actually get into it, you understand what's really compelling does not equal effective, right? So what you might achieve might be quite compelling, but that doesn't mean that it works today, doesn't mean it scales, doesn't mean there aren't an immense amount of hurdles. So I think my eyes went wide open into the starting side, the co-founding company side, because I understood that it was compelling what the initial data would say, but there were still a lot of milestones, a lot of things to get through in order to actually have a product. So I think I went into it with more reality than just, this is already cool and it's just get to the next milestone that we're successful. This could be cool. There's a lot of milestones, but those are going to be fun to knock down because there are significant accomplishments.
Yeah. And then every early stage company that I work with, one of the major hurdles that they always see is trying to get, because you have that experience, does it help you as well with trying to find funding for the companies that you work with?
Yeah, I think funding is, as someone who's raised multiple rounds of capital, funding can at times still be a black box, depending on the market, depending on the space you're in, depending on a lot of factors. And as you probably know, most professional investors don't give you great details. If they pass, they don't really tell you clearly why. And it's not in their best interest to. You don't blame them for it, but I'd say it's less of a black box the longer I do it. But we've obviously been successful at it, so I think I think trends start to emerge. Part of the trend, I think, and also think what people are looking for stage-wise changes. I think when you're early, you're starting out, it's about the team and the people, and can we bet on these people to go build a team to go get this thing to the next step? And can we give them enough money to go get the next round of financing? Beyond that, it becomes what do you do with that money? And was it successful? And did you make progress? How much runway do you have left? What does the next step look like? When's the next inflection point? So it changes from we're making a bet on this holistic kind of idea and these people to like, okay, what have they actually done? And can we now justify putting in a lot more money to get to that primary inflection point that everyone is seeking? So it just, I think conversations change as companies evolve, and you just have to understand that how you raise money the first time will not be how you raise money the second time.
Oh, yeah. And I would imagine right now it's extra hard just because of the unknowns in the economy, just unknowns in terms of how long we're going to, where we're currently at and things like that. I keep hearing indications that things have really slowed as well.
Yeah, I hear this all the time. Actually, I don't subscribe to it. Here's why. One is like we can't control it, right? So market conditions are what they are. So me going anywhere to my team or to our current investors or on any podcast saying, "Oh, it's tough and it can't be done," it doesn't serve anybody. So I just don't follow that logic. I just don't do it. I don't subscribe to any of that part of it. We still have our work to do. We're still well funded to do the work. So I think we're in a good spot, regardless of what the market conditions are. Two, I come from a world where my first company was based out of Houston, Texas, for a neuroimaging company for a diagnostic with no treatment. So that to me was hard. That was as a first time CEO. That was hard. That was hard fundraising. So now I'm based in California. The team is close together. We're all in person every day. Nothing's virtual. There's a greater pool of investors to choose from. We're in the therapeutic space. We're in the aging longevity space. So actually, I look at this as being much easier than previous experience I've had, but that's an N of one. So everyone may not feel that way. At the same time, I also feel great data plays in any market. So it's about, you can spend time making excuses or talking about why it's not going to happen, or you can spend time making reps and just generating great data that's irrefutable and revolutionary in the field. And so we just focus on what we can control, which is the data we produce. That's really how we think about it. And it doesn't serve us to think about it in any other way.
Yeah, it's funny because so I'm an operations guy. So from my perspective, it's always, okay, so there's obstacles. Let's just go build a plan and do this lots of times until we find the right way to do it. If we can't, if there isn't a known path today, so let's just go figure it out. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I think it's iron sharpens iron, right? So even the more challenging it gets, it also forces you as an operator and you as a company to be even better. When money is loose, you don't have to be the best at what you do. You can be good. But this market also forces, I think, people like us to be even better. So I think I try to just look at it from what it gives you, not what it takes from you.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know quite a few people that have gone the other way. So I know quite a few people that were in the medical device and then went either the venture capital or private equity route. And I only know you in terms of coming the other way. What made you want to come away from venture capital into more the medical device and also now pharmaceutical?
I don't know if it was like a immediate binary reaction. It was I just felt more alive when I was in the company versus on the investing side. Put more simply, I think I'm probably too nosy to stay out of things. Like I think good investors give you their advice, hold back for a little while, let you give you more advice or more capital or direction, and they let you work. And for me, it was always like I want to do the work. I don't like to talk that much. I don't love giving advice. I just like to work. And so I like to work like directly on the problem, not as a like on the sidelines. And I think investors, they can be sometimes they're in the middle, but oftentimes like their role is to provide capital and to give advice and otherwise let the team work. And I just prefer being on the field rather than on the sidelines.
Yeah, makes sense.
Although
So
it might be more straightforward on the sidelines and probably it's really more financially responsible, I think, to do the investor side. But you love what you love.
yeah. What then led you to Deciduous? What led to the company creation and to your being there?
Yeah, so it was 20, so it's right mid to late 2018, and I'd taken about 6 months off and advised, started a couple other companies during that advisory time. I had my second daughter, and so I started thinking, now I'm ready to get back to working full time again and as an operator again in the CEO position once again. And I was fortunate because we're in California, we're in San Francisco, and have known UCSF for a long time. Know a lot of people, a lot of key people at UCSF. And when I was ready to come out of my advisory period for that 6 months, where I took off, I talked to Reg Kelly, who's is now, I guess, in semi-retirement, but he was head of the QB3 Institute and basically sees every company that's going to come out of UCSF. And I just said to Reg, when you see something interesting that you think is going to be early but revolutionary, potentially, I'd like to know about it and see if I can figure out how to structure a company around it and a business around it. We talked about a couple things here and there, but he pointed me to Neil Bouchon's work in the lab. He said there's this idea around senescence removal can prevent diabetes. And I just thought that's one, I think senescence is very interesting because I actually was quite informed about the space prior to that after looking at some previous opportunities, but I was not at all interested in the diabetes, like the type 1 diabetes space. So I'd actually done a company like that way back and nothing against that. I think there's still opportunity in T1D to play, but it wasn't an indication area that really interested me. But the senescence piece did. And so we really thought about how can we make this around a platform for treating a lot of senescence-driven diseases, not a metabolic or not a autoimmune disease. So I think once we had that idea, you can functionalize the immune system to clear senescent cells globally and systemically in 10 plus indications. That's when I got really excited that the platform utility here was going to be significant. We just had to decide which indications to go after first and push getting in vivo data on those indications.
Interesting. And then the name deciduous, you mentioned what it is, but where did it come from?
Yeah, so it's actually Anil's idea. So I give all the credit to him because he came up with the name before I was really even in the picture, but he's got a really interesting mind. And so he just thought of it like the need in the senescent space was to understand how this could happen naturally by using the endogenous immune process. Right. So that was the foundational idea of the company. And then if you think about nature, think about how trees like deciduous trees shed their leaves every fall naturally. It's this natural shedding of these beautiful but also dead leaves, right? And so that was the connection to nature. And really, we're therapeutically just harnessing nature once again to treat these, to get rid of these senescent cells. It's actually his idea, and to his credit, that he came up with that name. And actually, is a really beautiful analogy between the two.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the more simple the thought process is behind it, the more it makes logical sense that, yeah, this is what it needs to be as well. Yeah, seems like a really good fit as well.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about what you're working on at Deciduous. What do you expect the outcome will be, and then where are you guys at currently?
Sure. So the overarching idea here is that senescent cells are something that happen with aging, they happen with disease. These are very inflammatory cells. So for senescent cells, anyone who doesn't study the space, essentially these are cells that have been irreversibly damaged. So cell becoming damaged isn't always a problem. Sometimes cells become damaged all the time. There's DNA repair mechanisms that allow them to be repaired, go back into the cell cycle. But sometimes they become irreversibly damaged, which means that some insult has happened to the cell that causes it to not be able to repair itself. Maybe it could be reactive oxygen species, could be high glucose, could be an injury, could be a chemical. There's a telomere shortening. Any number of things can happen to make these cells irreversibly damaged, but they all filter into that kind of this senescent phenotype over time. Senescent phenotype basically says, I'm irreversibly damaged and I'm not going to go back in the cell cycle. I'm not going to get repaired. I need to get out. I need to go towards apoptosis or cell death. The issue is that when these senescent cells start giving off these signals that they're not going to replicate anymore and they're irreversibly damaged, they start giving off these inflammatory signals, which is meant evolutionarily to attract the immune system to clear them out and remove them. The problem is that the immune function that should clear these senescent cells fails.
Yeah.
And when it fails, these cells accumulate, and they accumulate by one, further damage to other cells, but also these senescent cells, it's almost like a screaming child. Like they just start to scream louder over time. And what they will do over time is through cell to cell contact, they will make other good cells in the environment also become senescent and damaged. So it's not about one cell becoming damaged, it's about cells because the primary cell was not removed. So now basically ruins it for everybody and starts destroying tissue through cell to cell contact. And over time, you get pathology, you get inflammation, you get fibrosis, you get stem cell exhaustion. And so the idea is getting rid of these cells early and often is critical. And we know that in the literature, if you get rid of these cells early and often, it can resolve 20 plus diseases, most of them age-related, most of them comorbidities. And so now the mission of Deciduous is now basically to reestablish that immune function to getting rid of these cells. So we can activate natural killer T cells, which we figured out are responsible for clearing senescent cells. We can reactivate them in a diseased tissue. We have shown in the published literature that we can remove these senescent cells with a single dose, meaning that you activate the NKTs once, they will ablate senescent cells in the tissue of interest almost back down to nothing. And the most important part is that it actually resolves disease. So in metabolic disease, we can take mice that are metabolically compromised, we can make them metabolically normal once again. In pulmonary fibrosis, we can resolve fibrosis in animals that either would die from the injury of being induced with pulmonary fibrosis or at least would be fibrotic for a period of months. So we can actually resolve both of those diseases with a single treatment of the drug. Now, you would repeat the drug treatment every so often to keep the senescent cells at bay, but we envision a quarterly type treatment to treat diseases versus treating something every day with minimally efficacious drugs. So that's what we propose to do.
Nice. And then where are you currently in terms of overall development?
Yes, we've established some really nice lead compounds. We're now in the process of selecting how to go forward into the clinic. So we basically have all the biology worked out. Probably can't be too specific on a more public forum,
Sure.
but I'd just say the lead compounds have been sussed out. We know how the biology works very well. We're now just fine tuning a couple things here and there to make it go from what I'd consider a research molecule to a clinically viable molecule. So there's not a whole lot left on that piece, but there are FDA milestones that we need to get through that are critical for us to go forward.
Very good. And then in terms of BlueStamp Engineering, whenever I read about this, I was very interested to hear more about what made you start it, and then what specifically is it doing as well.
Yeah, so this is very different, obviously, than biotech. So it's actually something my friend and I from college started together back in, I think we thought of the idea back in 2010, launched our first program in 2011. And so we were both coming out of startups, had some time off. We were both single, we could do a couple things at once. We had more time on our hands than we do now, driving a number of kids. It was more a way for us to provide something valuable to high school students that we thought could propel them in the future, specifically in the world of engineering. So the idea being that engineers are incredibly valuable. Most of the world's progress and inventions are really engineering feats, whether it's bioengineering, mechanical, electronics, computer. Think about everything we do today. There's some engineer somewhere or a team of engineers has enabled that to happen. So we think it's really important. What we didn't like about engineering is that the way it was taught or delivered in a school setting, we thought left a lot to be desired. And that's not a knock on schools. This is a knock on reality of you've got 35 kids in a classroom, you're doing your best. For an engineer, they need to be taught in smaller cohorts. They need to get real world hands-on experience. And so we wanted to offer them a summer program where they could say, okay, I'm in high school, but I aspire to solve climate change. And through that, I want to learn how to make solar panels. I want to learn how to make wind turbines. I want to learn how to make hydroelectric power systems, smart gardens, voice controlled rovers, anything that kind of interested them. We wanted to basically provide them a forum where they could come in for 6 weeks in our in-person program or 3 weeks in our remote program and say, I'm going to make this project. And the reason I'm going to do it is one, because I have the passion for it. Two, because I have instructors around me who have experience in this space and they can guide me when I get stuck. It's a very self-driven program. Every student makes their own project, but it's when you do the showcase, the demo night at the end of the summer, it's pretty tear-jerking because you have 15, 16, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds building crazy projects that you wouldn't even think a college or even a graduate student could do, but they're in their high school years. And they sound confident, they sound smart, and they look happy. And I think that's really what I get out of it, is it makes them happy to do something really challenging. And I think that's why the program's been fun for us.
Yeah, it's funny because I used to partner with a local community college in terms of their engineering program that they had locally, and then they had talked about removing some of the initial troubleshooting and things like that from their program. And I said, at the end of the day, and this is the closest that these people will ever come to actually touching some of the components, because everything's built in today. Everything's built into some sort of microprocessor or something else. You don't normally touch a lot of the components. So troubleshooting becomes important from the standpoint of like really figuring out how to fix real world problems. Otherwise, yeah, it becomes an academic exercise that at the end of the day, the people, still whenever they hit the ground in the real world, they're going to have to go backwards and then figure out how to do these things anyway. And
yeah,
we agreed to keep it for a little while. I don't know what's happened since then, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. In the program, we have a simple motto: if it challenges you, it changes you. Seek challenges, seek things that are hard, and do them, because you're going to be better off for it. But it's going to be probably some short term misery while you sort it out. So that's just part of the process.
Good. And then the things that they primarily focus on, though, would be anything that has to do with engineering as a whole, or are there specific focus areas that BlueStamp focuses in on?
It's really up to them. Part of the education process we want to put in place is that, if you want to do it, we want to do it. What that means is if they feel strongly about it, then they're going to work the hardest at it. So they pick their own projects. We give them some choices of what we think are reasonable. They can take those. They cannot take those. It's really up to them. But we want to give them a starting point of here's what could be possible. Half of them think our thoughts are pretty cool. Half of them are like, no, I really want to do this video game or this rover or this drone or whatever it is. I think it's great. As long as it's safe, we really don't care. It's really about, we want them to be happy and safe. And so if it meets those two things, we'll do it. And that's how we think about it. They pick these projects before the program starts. They sort them out with their instructors. They get an idea of how they're going to build it. But there's a lot of planning that goes involved in it. It's a 6-week program on paper, but in reality, it's probably more like 8 or 9 weeks with the prep and the wrap up.
Very cool. And then I also saw that you were the entrepreneur in residence at NYU. One of the things that I continually talk to people about is just entrepreneurship inside of life sciences. And I feel like there's this education gap that kind of exists where you learn some of the theory of entrepreneurship and you learn a lot of the science around life sciences, but you typically don't learn like both together, the education that you've more or less gotten as being the CEO. Have you seen any of that? Are there like 1 or 2 things that you would have liked to have learned in school that, you wish that you would have had as you got started?
Yeah, but probably not in the way that I think people think about it classically. I think you can learn those things in a class. And I was in the class, obviously, so I can tell you, you can learn them on paper, but it's almost meaningless in a lot of ways because somebody telling you that this is what it's going to be like it gives you a sense of what it could be like, but that's all it does, right? So it's not going to like prepare you for real world circumstances. Also, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a startup person, like the volume of personalities and diversity and people you're going to meet, there's nothing that can prepare you for that. There is no, this is the type of people you interact with. It's like you interact with everybody. We're in the longevity therapeutic space. Like we interact with traditional biotechs, traditional pharma VCs. We interact with some people who think they're never going to die. People think they're going to live to 300 years old. They might all be right. I'm just saying it's a different personality set from morning to afternoon to lunch to everything. So I don't think there's anything that prepares you. If anything, I would say focus on the technical abilities, right? So I think if you want to be good at this job, you need to be technically sound. This isn't life science is not a place where I think where quote unquote MBAs or business people can get by that's just not sufficient. Like you need to be technically knowledgeable. You need to understand diligence. You need to understand scientific rationale. You need to be able to talk like a scientist, even if you're not doing the science or even if you're not a scientist on paper. You need to be technically very sound. And I think people in life sciences who want to get in from the outside, I would say my first suggestion would be read a lot of papers and ask a lot of questions and understand the science and understand what people are going to ask about the science because you're going to have to answer it and have great answers lined up. I think if you do that, you come across as credible. I think if you don't do that, you come across as more business than scientist. And I think that's probably where people go south.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, it's interesting to me because some of the people that I see as well have to be able to bridge back and forth as well. So there are 3 questions that I like to ask every guest. Robin, what inspires you?
A couple things. I would say at a baseline, I think of my role as someone who can work on things that other people may not at an early stage. So I think a lot of people like where these things can go. I think very few people are willing to get involved early when it's still interesting, but very without a lot of data to support the idea. So I've always prided myself on it could be cool. Let's go figure out how to do this. So I think the magnitude of the challenge is one thing that inspires me. 2, I think it's having an impact. So there's areas that I'd like to play in. There's areas that I will not touch. And basically they're driven by what is meaningful to me personally. So age-related diseases are meaningful to me personally. Climate change is meaningful to me personally. Some indication areas, knock on wood, like type 1 diabetes, certain types of cancer, I haven't been affected by them to this point in my life from my family or for me personally. So they don't have the same level of inspiration. The things that have affected my family tend to really inspire me because I look at it as it gives me a reason to really think about and want to solve these issues. And I think entrepreneurship can be challenging and there's ups and downs. And I think during the downs, you need to understand there's got to be more of a why than just because it's my job. There's got to be like an inherent underlying personal passion that will drive you forward during the dark times. And so those kind of 2 things I look for when I think about getting involved in something new.
Yeah, having the driving force and using that inspiration for your driving force is very important as well. Yeah. What concerns you?
It's more of a global question. I'd say I think there's some challenges. Obviously, it's just 2 things that I think about. One is I think our healthcare system is not always set up to understand treatment of underlying disease versus what's beneficial to the markets. I think a lot of the medicine therapies out there right now they don't actually treat disease, but they are good business plays. And so it's a juxtaposition of what's good for our healthcare system, what's good for our own global economics. And I think those forces are always bumping heads. So I think one of the things I like about our approach is it treats underlying disease and it's cost effective and it can be applied to everybody. And if it couldn't be that, I probably wouldn't be so excited about it. Because look at our responsibility as like, let's drive healthcare costs down responsibly, but let's also treat disease. I think a lot of therapies, a lot of approaches I see tend to be evolutionary step-ups from what's been there before, but they don't treat disease at the core level. They're very expensive, and it almost seems like we have sick care, not healthcare, and I think that really annoys/concerns me. So I think that's probably the cleaner line to success in a lot of ways, but it's not one that I subscribe to. We're trying to revolutionize things to be to what we think they should be, not what they are right now. So that's one thing. And then two, I think what always concerns me is that I think globally as a society, we don't deal with challenges. The old adage of a stitch in time saves nine. I think we don't do that. So I think about climate change. I think about the aging population in the country. And I think we know it's coming. We know it's going to be bad. And we're talking about it and some people are working on it, but no one's actually we're not making a lot of progress. And by the time we decide to make progress, it might be, I'm not going to say it's going to be too late, but it's going to be more challenging the longer we let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. The more we seem to, with climate change, the more we seem to wait, the more there seems to be a larger signal of, yes, there's a problem here that we should all be responding to as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. And then lastly, what excites you?
In the day-to-day, I think it's just actually the day-to-day. I actually enjoying this work, what we learn every day. I think my greatest joy in being in the company is learning new things. There's no shortage of things to learn each and every day. There's no shortage of things that will humble you every day. So I think I feel good at night when I learn or been humbled in some new way every day. And if I feel like that wasn't the case, it's probably not as good of a day. So I look at it as like my job is to do hard things. And when I do that, I feel good. And when I don't do that, I feel bad. So I think what excites me is actually the day-to-day challenges and day-to-day learnings of being a different person by the evening than I was in the morning.
Yeah. Robin, thank you so much for being a guest on the Life Science Success Podcast. And thank you so much for sharing with us everything that you're doing at Deciduous. I greatly appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Very good. Thank you so much, Don. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.